This is Design Safe Radio, where natural hazards researchers strive to make our society more resilient to everything nature throws at us.
So let's talk about some of the details of one of these deployments. Either that first one with David Rouche or an example of one more recently. Like, what does that timeline look like? What are some of the steps? Like, how do you decide to actually conduct a reconnaissance mission and select the team and all that stuff?
Yep. So one of the reasons actually we stood up, or the directors, I should say, so the Davids, Tracy, Muhammad, Ian, everyone stood up. The Wind Advisory Board, the Coastal Advisory Board, the Earthquake Advisory Board, is to help us decide the timeline and like what events we're going to go out for. And so part of the advisory board is to help make those decisions. And what that usually starts with is if we think something is significant enough to do a virtual reconnaissance. And that means, again, we go in and we look at Twitter posts. So yes, your Twitter and your Instagram, we stalk that for damage pictures.
We stalk it for science.
It's for science. So we go and we gather that kind of information and we compile it and we do like a kind of high level look at the structural failures. And sometimes from those virtual assessments, we can then say, okay, well, I think we want more detail in this area because there seems to be a pattern here that we haven't captured before. For example, in that first trip that I went on with David Rouche, one of the things that we looked at was there were a lot of new construction houses that were impacted. This was a Nashville tornado back in 2020.
Oh, I remember that one.
Yeah. And so we wanted to check out some of these neighborhoods that were new construction, and because we hadn't had that in our data sets before. And so that was that. We also had some interest in historical buildings because it hit Nashville, and we had some interest in how those historical buildings functioned.
Right.
Because those have a little bit of different building behavior since they're not often up to code, because it's so difficult to get those to code. So, we look at each event and we kind of see, okay, what can this add to our overall knowledge base of how buildings fail or how they succeed also?
So when you had that, that Nashville tornado incident, like, how do you plan out where you're going to go and get the travel there and logistics? I mean, there's a lot of things that go into getting a team there and ready to collect data and report on that. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
I can tell you a little. I will say David Rouche did a lot of that planning for that one. And it seems to involve a lot of working with the local municipalities, their local police department, local EM. Sometimes we have to coordinate with FEMA. There's usually, to get into some areas that are especially devastated, we have to go and check in with a centralized EM area where we check in, we tell them where we're going, we get clearance so that we can get past, say, a barricade, because sometimes they try and keep people out because you don't want just people coming in to, look and snoop at people's destroyed homes. So it takes a level of coordination with them. And sometimes we have to start our day by going to that kind of muster point and getting the approved clearances for that. And as far as deciding if we go to those areas, a lot of that comes down to, one, what type of information are we looking to gather? Are we looking for this type of structure? Or are we looking for another type of structure? Excuse me. Are we also looking for if we want gradation of damage? And what I mean by that is, do we want really severe damage structures as well as very low damage structures? Or do we want to see like the worst of the worst? And so it comes into a little bit of planning with that. Some of it is also access, especially with things like hurricanes, where you can't get to some areas because it's all washed out. Some of it has to do with access. What can we feasibly get to? Some stuff that we can't feasibly get to, we do fly drones over. So, and that depends on if we can get the FAA clearance to do that. So there's that aspect as well. And so it's really the logistics boiled down to, because it's an emergency area, it's a disaster zone. We're trying to time it with everything so we're not in the way, and what we're doing is still beneficial.
Mm-hmm. And then there's a lot of organizations, well, not a lot. There are a handful of organizations that are also working on getting to these same areas at the same time. Team Rubicon being one, and a couple of other kind of civilian disaster response type organizations. Do you share the data that you're producing with them in real time? Like, how does that kind of coordination work with that centralized incident management that you were talking about?
Yeah, we actually do. So most of our coordination happens on Slack, and we have people in that communication that are from FEMA that do some of their deployment groups. We have people who are from the Army Corps, and it's similar, and all those people are looped in so that we can kind of feed off each other's data and loop that all into each of our reports. And so it is shared, and that's one of the things I actually really like about it, is that the community shares all that information, and we actually try and coordinate together to see, okay, well, the FEMA MAT is getting this area. Sorry, that's a mitigation assessment team, I believe is what MAT stands for.
Yeah, a lot of acronym soup around disaster response.
I know. Please stop me if I forget an acronym.
Yeah, I think we mentioned EM earlier, which would be emergency management, right?
Yes. EM would be emergency managers. And so, yeah, all those groups do tend to coordinate in getting that data together. Yeah,
if you're a listener of another podcast that I'm on occasionally, and actually I should introduce you to them, the Disaster Podcast, they're more in the emergency management side of things, and it's always fascinating to hear how they use data from StEER. Like every time some big event hits, they get me on there and say, hey, what's StEER doing? What's the virtual assessment doing? Like, well, let me check Slack and see what's going on. And it's so helpful to have people like the Davids and yourself who are going out in these events, posting in real time on Slack as you're putting together the virtual assessment, as you're getting the physical field team together, to be able to share it out to other organizations who are interested and also deploying to the same areas to manage the response.
Yeah, I think one of the other groups that we overlap or try to, at least I know we use a bit of their damage assessments, is the National Weather Service, their damage assessment toolkit. And so the National Weather Service, especially for tornadoes, will deploy groups after the fact because they have to rate that tornado. Mm-hmm. And so they'll go out and take images. So we also coordinate with that. And I do like that StEER does that because it allows for a little more overlap in the atmospheric science area, as well as the engineering area.
Yeah, or a lot of people may not know, if you're not into wind engineering and atmospheric science, like you can't rate a tornado by radar observations in real time. You have to assess the level of damage and calculate wind speed based on the masses of things like 2x4s and how far they crashed into things.
Yep, that's pretty much how we rate tornadoes. It has to do with how much damage did they cause and what failed, and how sturdy was the structure that failed.
Yeah, it's really, really important work. Every time StEER or the NWS goes out, it adds to our body of knowledge about how to respond to these events and how to build back better, hopefully, the structures that were there. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Design Safe Radio. We really appreciate it. Smash that like button if you're watching this on YouTube. Hit that little subscribe button. That really helps us out and bring this message to more people who are interested in hearing about how our engineers and scientists are making our society more resilient to everything nature throws at us. A big thank you to our sponsors at the National Science Foundation. Our award number is 212-9782. And a big thank you to our program officer, Joy Kowski, who is excellent. And our team at the National Science Foundation's Network Coordination Office for NARI. Marty LaChance is our question writer and copy editor extraordinaire. Raquel Ruiz manages all things technical and editorial. And Morgan Glass is our social media coordinator. big thank you to everybody at the NARI NCO and all of our experimental facilities. Thank you and have a great day.